Hi guys, welcome to Digital TechJoint. In this video tutorial, we are going to learn about ASP.NET Web API. We are going to uncover certain important concepts, and we are going to create a Web API that performs a complete CRUD operation. Then we are going to test the API using the inbuilt provided Swagger tool and also use Postman to test an API. So all this we are going to do within 60 minutes. Someone who really needs to understand what is an API and get started with the developing a web API, then this is the ultimate video tutorial that you'll ever find in YouTube. So let's get started. Before we start, let us understand what is a web API. So basically a web API is nothing but an application programming interface. Now, when I say API it provides a mechanism that connects or enables communication between two software components. It's like exchanging the data that is required between two or more software components. For example, let's assume you have a weather app in your phone and you could like to understand what is the current weather or forecast. Now, when you open the app and then when you enter the date or when you check the forecast detail, the app connects with an API, a weather API, and fetches all that information and displays in your mobile application. So this app is basically connecting to a web API. Now web API has a capability that provides an option for any client, whether it is a mobile app, whether it is a website, whether it's a Windows app, to consume the API and perform the request and response. Now when you talk about request and response, you can see the slide over here. There is a client over here, and this client can be a mobile app. As I mentioned, it can be a Windows app, it can be a portal, it can be website. Any client can consume an API irrespective of the language. For example, you can do it in C# or you can use PHP, anything. Now now when you consume this client, an API, the API basic functionality is to the client will always use a request to the server, and then the server will process that request basis whatever was passed in the request component, and accordingly the server will send back the response to the client. Now when I talk about request and response, this does not mean that the client will request anything at any parameters and the server needs to reply and provide the response. There could be a possibility that when the request is coming, the request is not valid, and accordingly the server will respond with certain error code. So what is the communication, in what fashion this communication happens between the client and server? We will deep dive into that. Now if you look at the request and response, typically follows certain norms and definition. So when there is a request, the request carries HTTP verbs. So the here mentioned verbs is basically an HTTP verbs. Now when I say HTTP verbs, it is nothing but an action. So when a request is initiated from the client to the server, it carries certain action. What needs to be done? For example, the verb might have different type of action, which we will deep dive in the next slide. Similarly, the request can contain headers, it can contain status code, and obviously it can contain the content of the request and the response. Now when I move to the next slide, you can see over here the request typically contains HTTP verbs. Now that is divided into get, post, put, and delete. These are action that the client is expecting the server to do. Similarly, the request contains header. The header contains various parameters and information, like it contains your security or token information, it can contain your browser type, it can contain the cache time, etc. and etc. Then it contains the status code, and then it contains the actual matter, that is the body, that is the content type. So this all parameters are passed into the request, which the server will process and then return the response in a similar manner. Now when the server is written, it does not contain the verb, it will contain the header, it will contain the status code, and it will also have the actual body, that is content. Now the best part of API is that API integration, as I mentioned, can be consumed in any of the client, and it provides the reusability of the service, and it also provides uh, a platform where you can call multiple APIs and fetch the data accordingly. Now if you look at a portal like booking site, I'll just show that site to you right now. So here I am on a portal, and there's a site called Make My Trip. Now Make My Trip is nothing but a portal that provides customers to search for flight, book trains and hotels. Now just imagine this site, Make My Trip, is actually has a capability to call all the flight information whenever you search for any particular source and the destination. For example, I select Mumbai to say Delhi, and I provide the dates of and then I click on the search. Now when I do a search, this site connects to all the airlines, fetches the availability along with the status, along with the fare to the customer. Now, this is a very good example where the single site, that is a website, is actually calling all the APIs of all the airlines and then displaying that to the customer. So this is a capability that the web API has of integrating, like you as a client can integrate multiple APIs and provide the functionality where client can actually reuse those components. Now all these airlines that you can see, these airlines have the common APIs that they have used and provided to the site Make My Trip, as well as they have used the same APIs on their own website. So what happens, they are not doing development of separate development, rather they are leveraging the capabilities of the API so that it can be reused on multiple platforms. So this is one of the example that I just came across, and I thought that I will just share it with you guys. Now coming back to our slide, so when I talk about HTTP verbs, let me just define you in detail what the HTTP verbs carry. So then we have HTTP verb called get. So get, basically whenever there's a request from the client to the server using the get object, the client is expecting that the server will process something and return back some data, as the name implies. Similarly, we have post, where the client, when the client will post some data in to the server, where the server will process and update or add some data in the database. Similarly, we have put, which actually replaces certain resources on the server, and then we have delete and then patch. Now all this we are going to understand when we are actually going to do the practical session. So without wasting much time, let's get into the practical session and let's create a web API and test all this concept that we just explained. So guys, we have opened Visual Studio 2022 and I've got the preview version 2. So let's create a project and let's call the web API. So now you can search the template if you're not able to see it. So there is web API, and just type web API. So yeah, so ASP.NET Core.web API. So this is what project I'm going to select. Click on next, and this is API demo API. This is a location where it is stored. I click on next. I select .NET 8.0 and I untick HTTPS as of now. Okay, so this is use controller and enable OpenAI. So I just let that be ticked and I click on create. So here you can see our project template is loaded, and by default we have a weather forecast CS they have created for showing the demo of web API, and then we have the program files, app setting, and then we have a controller, a default controller called weather forecast controller. So let's do one thing, let's run this project now. So when we run the project, you can see the Locolo Swagger index page. Now this is the Swagger tool that is provided by default in Visual Studio. This is similar to Postman. If you guys are not aware of the Postman, we'll cover that in this section. So Postman is a tool that enables you to do the complete API testing. Okay. Similarly, they are provided an inbuilt Swagger tool over here. Now when you see, there's one class called weather forecast, and there is a method I explained in this PPT, get method. So when you click on this get method, so the expectation is that you'll get certain records, because the request is going to the server to get some information. Now here we have something called tryout. When I click on tryout, There's no parameters in this get method, and we just have to click on execute. So when I do that, you can see the request is gone to the server. This is a server, and then you get a response that is status code 200 means everything went well, and here you can see certain information that is displayed. Now I'll just explain you certain things. So here you can go to the program CS, and here you can see there is something called builder services.add swagger gen. So this actually code enables the swagger tool to be displayed and where you can use the testing. Now when you come to the controller, this is the default controller that we was provided with a template. Here you can see certain methods. That get method, here you can see there's a get method over here, http get. This was called, and this when this was clicked, there was a class over here that is provided, which was having the property, and some default data was provided and fetched by the class. Here you can see this all the information was provided. Now please don't get confused. I'll just uncover this when I create my own class and show you how this works. Now let's do one thing. Before we deep dive into our API and delivering an API that uses database for CRUD operation, I want to just simplify this entire process. Right click on the controller and say add controller. Now when I say add controller, then you need to select not the MVC but API, and select API controller and select an empty controller. Now this is my empty controller, and this I'm just want to name it as demo. So as usual, we don't delete the controller. We just name this one, the first part, the name. Let the controller be there and CS. So I had this, and this is added over here. Now when I add this over here, you can see this particular controller as the route. So this is a route, typically API/controller, that I'll show to you. And this API controller derivative says that this class is an API controller class. Sorry. And it implements controller base. Now this is a class that I've just added, and now when I click on the run, since there is no method over here defined, I will not be able to see any method in the Swagger. So here, ideally, if I want to also add demo controller or demo API, then I'll have to add certain methods. So I'll just go ahead and do that. So typically I will also use a get method. So http get. So here this is one I've added, and then I'm going to say public class say hello API. This is a method, and this simply return this would be a public string hello, and this returns hello API. So now when I run this project, I should be able to see demo, and I should be able to see under the demo get object. So here you can see there's a demo and there's a get. Now when I click on that, I click on tryout, and then I click on execute, and here you can see the result hello to API. So this simplifies the entire weather forecast class that was default added for. So this simplifies the process. So now you understand how the Swagger works and how you are able to fetch the data and use the Swagger. Now I will show the Postman way of calling your API and testing later once our API is ready. Also, for any class to become a controller class to become an API, you can simply implement control base and use this API control derivative, and that class will become a web API class. So now let's proceed with developing our own API that performs CRUD operation. So first thing, let's go ahead and create a database. So I'm going to open my SQL Server Management Studio 19 version. So here it's a I just open this server, SQL Server Management. So this is a server. I'm just copying the server name. This will be used for adding it in the connection string. I'll right click it, new database, and I say API student API. So I'm going DB. So this is my student API DB database. So I've created the database. Now I'm going to Visual Studio again, and I'm going to select app setting, and here I'm going to define the connection string. This is the default connection. This is the name of my connection string, and here I'm going to say server, and I'm going to copy my server name, and then my database name is student API DB, then integrated security is true. So I'm going to use the Windows credentials in order to provide username password, and most important, trust server certificate equals to true. So I defined my connection string. So once my connection string is defined, I'll also create a module class. I want to say module class, and I'm going to add a class called students entity. And I'm going to define certain properties, prop ID, and this is my ID, which is a primary key. Then this is my name of the student. This will be age of the student. And this will be string standard. And finally, we'll have email address for the student. So we have defined some fields. We'll set this ID as key. So our model class is also ready now. Now next step we're going to do is add the required packages. So I'm going to go to NuGet packages, and I want to install Entity Framework Core. Okay. So then I want to install Entity Framework Core.SQL. This one. And finally tools, because I'm going to use migration. Great. So we have installed the following tools over here. Install these three packages: core, SQL Server, and tools. So now let's go ahead and create our application DB context class, which will be, let's create a folder called data, and then right click on that and say a new class and name it as application DB context. Okay, and this class will implement DB context. Okay, so now I'll just use this entity framework code, and then click on application DB context class and select generate constructor using options, and then we are going to call the entity that we created. So we're going to say prop db set this is the name of the table. So here we are going to call student entity, and we want students as a name of the table. So we can, this will be the name of the table, so that will be created in our database, student API DB students. Okay, or you can call it student register. So this will be the table name. So once our application DB context is ready, once the connection string is ready, let's go to our program.cs, and before var app equals to builder.build, just we're going to add builder.services.add db context, and call our application DB context class. Then enter options, number expression, options dot use SQL Server here, and enter the connection string. So it's builder dot configuration dot get connection string, and this is a default connection that we have provided in the apps.json file. Let me just have a look. Yes, default connection. I'm still going to copy that and just paste it so that there's no issue. So we have set up everything. Now it's time that we just execute our migration class so that tool so that we can create that table in a database. Right now in our database, we will not have the table called students register. So this is the database and there is no tables over here. So let's go to tools and click on package manager. I'll just scroll it and say add migrations, and this is initial database setup. Okay, I think let's add migration initial DB setup. Fine, so our migration is successful and I'm sure there's a migration folder. So all these things is explained in my previous videos in my channel where I talked about how to use migration, what is migration and everything. I recommend everybody to go through that CRUD operation videos that I've created so understand this better. So once our migration is successful, we will not still have the tables created over here unless and until we execute a command called update database. And here you can see it's getting successfully created. Okay, so now we get this. If you get this error called only invariant culture supported, just right click on your project and select edit project, and here you can see invariant global globalization. Just set this as false, click on save and run the code again. So now if you go to database, and you can see it's successfully created the tables. Students register. This was a table that we had created. Okay, that's not. Let me just check application DB context class, student register, and so guys, I had just identified what was the issue. Now if you just refresh it, and I'd create this table called student API DB. And while I just mentioned that in the app setting, I did a small mistake over there. So my database name I just misspelled at instead of student, it was T was missing. So let me add the correct database again, student API DB, which is right over here. So what Visual Studio did is created this database, and then if you go inside this table, you will see the table over there. see over here, student register. So let's delete this and we'll have to run the migration again. What we're going to do is that we delete the migration folder and we'll run it again. So this is the correct database that I created, but by mistake there was a typo error. So now what I'm going to do is delete this migration and go to tools and click on migration, and I'm going to say add migration initial database setup. It's done, and now we are going to say update database. Great. And now if I go to my database that I created, so there are two ways. Either you create the database beforehand, or you don't need to create any database and it will create automatically. So here you can see student API DB, and here I should be able to see my student register and as well as the migration history. So now when I click on execute, I should be able to see no records over here, which is fine. Now our database is created, our migration worked well. So now it's time that we start creating our API. So let's go ahead quickly and do that. I'm going to right click on this controller and say add controller, and I'm going to select API, empty API, and I'm going to name this as students. Okay, so this is a controller class here, right over here. So I'm going to create my code over here now. First, I'm going to refer the application DB context class. So I'm going to say private application DB context, and this is my DB string. Then I'm going to create a constructor. So I'm going to type CTOR tap tap. So this is my constructor, and here I'm going to inject application DB context and initialize in the body DB, and this is test. So once I initialize this, I'm going to first write a get method. So I want a get method that fetches all the students. So I'm going to say http get, and I'm going to say public list, and this will be my student entity. Sorry, student entity get all students. So I'm going to say return DB context students register to list. That's a single line of code to fetch all the information. Let's just see these things in action. Before we do that, let's go to our table and right click, say edit rows, and add some information. I'm going to say Alex, age 15, standard 9th, and this Alex gmail.com. Let's add one more student, William, age 8, 5th, and then yahoo.com. So 2 students have added. Now expectation is that when I run this project, I should be able to see students in the Swagger. So I am able to see students as a class, and then inside student I'm able to see get students. So let me put a breakpoint over here and use a Swagger. So I'm going to say get students, say tryout, execute it. Here you can see I should be able to see yes, successfully executed. Now I click, and here you can see 2 students displayed from my database. So this is the first milestone we have created. We have created one API get method that fetches the record from the database, and we saw that in the Swagger. I would like to show you one more thing. What if my class as controller class has 2 get method? For example, let me just show it to you what actually happens. HTTP get, and I'm going to add one more method called public string get all students name. Okay, and this is simple method, and this returns hello students. Okay, now even this is get, and even this is get. Now there are two endpoints. The two endpoints having the same HTTP verb. Let us see what happens. You see the Swagger document is loaded, but then you get an error. Okay, this is because the it is not able to identify which method to display because both are get. To get around this problem, we just need to define the names. For example, if I say get and I say get me get students name. Okay, so now it is a get method and this is with the name, so it is able to now distinguish the two different get method, and we should not be able to see the error. You see, it's not able to. Now you can see there are two get methods. One returns the database, one you can just click on it and you can just use it. It will just say the message that we just hello students. So just make sure of this, you don't struggle with this concept. So here that is the reason I just cleared it. Now once we have the get method, let's now create a method that will add record to the database. So before we do that, we should also able to fetch a single record using the student ID. So let's do that. So I'm going to use same concept over here. I'm going to use get, and but I'm going to say get students by ID, and I'm just going to copy this. This will not be a list, but this will be an action method. So here I'm going to say action result and student entity, and say get student details, and this will be having an parameter called int32, and this will be ID. So this simply will have something called student details, and this will have db dot students as a get, and then we have a lambda function. Yes, so here now I return this to student details. Remember, I'm not using any validation over here. We'll add that. So this is the method. Now I'm going to just add a breakpoint. Now you can see in the Swagger tool, we'll get option to enter the input parameter ID. So here we have get student by ID. I click on that. Now see, you can see there is an, I click on tryout, and then I need to provide an ID. So I provide 1 and click on execute. Here you can see the ID will have the value 1, and it fetches. It is successfully fetched. Now you can see in the Swagger only one record is displayed of the ID 1. Now let's add some validations over here. So we need to ensure that the ID that is passed is correct and the ID is passed, and if it is not passed, what message to be displayed. So let's do that. So first we need to validate the ID. So here I'm going to say if ID equals to 0, that means ID is not passed, and for me it's a bad request. I say bad request and I hand it. So this is a bad request for me. So let's do, so once that's done, there's a one more validation we could add is that, let's try this out. I'm just going to not pass any information and see what happens. So you can click on get ID and try out, and I'm not going to pass, and I say execute, and here you can see it is returning as 400, which is a bad request. Okay, let's quickly now add other validations for the information. So here we are fetching the record, and here just we need to validate if student is null, that means the record was not found, and here I'm going to say return not found. So not found, I will have an HTTP response code. We'll check that. So now we have added two validation. Now quickly let's go ahead and add any ID which is not there in database. So we click student by ID. Let's say try out, and let's add that this ID is not there in database. Now if you can see, the code written is 404. So 404 means not found. Okay, so we have successfully added two validation. Now let's quickly go ahead and add new records in the database. So we covered HTTP GET. We also covered how to use multiple HTTP GET. Now it's time to enter the records in database. So now we are going to use HTTP POST. So let's remove this one and let's add HTTP POST, and this will be public action result as student entity and add student. So this will take parameter as this is my from body and student entity, student details. Here you can see, let me name this as details, student details. Now I'm going to first validate the model, and to ensure that the model is valid, I'll have to go to the class entity. Here you can see my model class. I'm going to say here add some validations. So this is required for me, and even age is required for me, even standard is required for me, and even email address is required for me. So I've added validation to my entity, and then here if I don't get a valid model object, I'm going to say return bad request and the model state. This is the first code. Second, I'm going to add this to the database. So I'm going to simply say after this validation student register dot add and db dot save changes, and I'm going to say return okay and object. So student details. So let's go ahead and see how do we do this. I'm just going to add a breakpoint. Here you can see there is a post method now with a different color. Click on that, click on try out, and here you need to provide. So ID will be null. Here I'm going to say Anthony and age 30. This is standard 10, can be 30, it should be 17, and then it's the email address. So this is the body I've created, and now I'm going to execute it. Here you can see student details will have all this information except for ID. Now the model is valid, so it will allow us to go inside, and then it will add this into our database. Here you can see it is added successfully, and you can also get the response. Okay, so you can see the status code as 200. That means it went well. Now if I go ahead and click on this API get students, I should be able to see even the newly added student over here. So click on execute, and here you can see the third student is successfully added. So we have managed to create add student to database with the validation. Now let's go ahead and also add update the data. So now we'll use the same post method, and then here I'm just copy this, and this is HTTP and I'm going to say update students details. I'm going to just change this to update student. Okay, and here there's a slight change over here. Now I'm going to pass the ID for which student you want to change the ID, data, and then the body which contains the information. Here also we can use the model state for validation. Okay, and we can just simply say that if the student details is null, then it's a bad request, and you can pass it over here. Then here you need to fetch the record to make sure that the student details ID pass is valid. So you're going to say db dot student register dot first dot default ID ID. And here you can add if student details is null, that means the ID pass does not have any information. So you say return not found. Okay. Otherwise, you need to update it. So I'm going to add code to update it. So here we're going to say student details dot name. So what was passed? Yes. So we're going to just copy this. Age, and this is the age. Then standard, and then email and email. So whatever was passed, the latest values are assigned to this object. And finally, we are going to say db.save changes. That's it. So now here what we can do, just 1 minute, I'll just change this. Okay, so it looks good. I just add a breakpoint over here. And let's now check the update in action. So update students, here you can see tryout, and here you're going to say I want to make an update for the third student, and ID will be 3 because we know what ID it is, so it's 3. And student name was Anthony. I'll just change it to Anthony D, and age I'm changing to 16 instead of 17, and standard was 10, and email was anthonyd@yahoo.com. So we have changed everything over here, and now let's click on execute. So the model is valid. It's come over. It is fetching 3 ID. Yes, it found the ID. So that means it is validated. This information is already there. You can see it's 17 and Yahoo and name Anthony and 10 standard. Now we have changed that to 16 standard 10 and email to Anthony D. Even the name is Anthony D now, and click on save. So now it's successfully saved. You can scroll down and see the response 200. Now we go up and click on get students, and we should see the updated record. Execute, and here you can see the updated record is over here. So we are finished with the update also. Now let's also add the functionality to delete. So we'll just copy this HTTP input for update and paste that code below for delete. And instead of put, we are going to post with HTTP input, and this is delete student. And then we are going to say delete over here, and we don't have to pass the actual body. So we're going to say pass ID, and we're just going to validate this ID is proper. And if this is proper, just want to change slide code change over here. This is student. Yeah. Okay. So here, if it is valid, then it will simply remove it. So I say db.remove, and this is student details, and save changes. And here we'll say return no content. So let us also see the delete functionality in action. So let's run it. So here you can see put is in a different color. We just click on that. We say tryout, and I use it ID3. Click on execute. Here you can see it is fetching the record. Yes, the record was found. It is removing the details, save changes, and then return back to details. So here the delete executed worked properly. Nice response 200 success. Now click on get students, and you will be able to see that the third student is not there in the list. Here you can see there are only 2 students now. So I'll just now show you guys how to use Postman instead of Swagger. So we created 3 methods. We created delete, and we created update, and then adding of students, getting student details, and getting all the students. Okay, so this completes the entire CRUD operation. I'll just open Postman now. So I have already installed Postman. If you guys have not installed Postman, I recommend you to install the Postman as well. So I have Postman installed. It's freely available and you can download it. So this is a Postman that I've installed it. Now in order to use the Postman, first we need to run the project first. So now the project is running in this particular localhost. Just copy this localhost 5055. This is the URL. Now you come to the Postman. Here I'll just delete this. Create a new request over here. So this is first you need to select the type of method verbs. So I'm going to say get because I'm going to get the student details. So I paste in the URL. This is the URL, and if you see get students, this is a get method, and I have not provided any key to it, the name to it. By default it will fetch this record. So I'm just going to say get and the URL and click on send, and I was not able to fetch because I need to type in API. Get all student. So guys, I was actually doing one mistake. So basically I was not, so this is the routing information. So there's a routing says API slash controller. So the controller is students. So obviously I need to go to the Postman. I'll just repeat it again. I just add a new request. I say get, then I paste the URL. This is the URL. So this is the URL. Okay, I copy that. I paste the URL. Then this is the API because, and then slash what is the controller. So here you can see it's API and the controller. So controller is students. Now if I just click on get, it will by default call me this method. Okay, I'll just show that thing is action API and students. And now if I click on send, yeah, I'm able to see the information over here, which is how it's Swagger. Now similarly, if I want to do get method, but I need to fetch that ID, so then I need to also pass the ID over here, and I should be able to see the record over in here for a particular student, for example Alex. Let's do that. So now let's call this method in the Postman get student details by ID. So we'll see how do we pass the ID and fetch only specific student details. So we click on new request. So this is a get, and this will be a URL which is already there. Okay, so this is a URL, and then we use API since we have that routing set as API, and then the controller name, that is students slash, and this is get. So we have this method over here, get student by ID. We use that, get student by ID, and then there is a question mark, and we pass a parameter ID, and then what field you want to student information you want. So I want to pass 2, and I want to get the information of William. So you can see I'm able to fetch the information of William. Similarly, if I type 1, I should be able to get the information Alex. And if I type anything which is not in the database, then I should be able to get the bad request. So we also saw how to fetch particular information. Now let's go and also use the add student in our Postman. So for that we need to change this to post, and then this will be student, and here we need to just call this name. So by default it will come over here, add student. We can also have a breakpoint. Now it will also pass in values. So here, since it's an adding request, and if I don't pass anything in the body, then what will happen, it will still consider as a bad request. You can see it's a bad request, and so it's a post and it doesn't have any. So now in order to do that, just pass the values over here. So we'll have this, we can just copy this content from here, from the Swagger, and we can paste this over here. So here, since we're adding a new record, we just have to mark this as 0, and this will be a new record. So you say Robert, and he's just 12 years old, or he's 14 years old, he's in 9th standard, and you change Robert's email, yahoo.com. So we are passing these values in the, you just have to delete this. So this is the body that we created, the parameters. Here you can see this is a post method, and this is the students flag, and then this is a post. Since it's a post and it's passing the value, we should be able to add this record in a database. Here you can see the value is passed successfully. Here you can see the information, and I'm going to just say run the project, and here you can see it's added successfully. Now go to the get method. We already have students, and we just simply use this to fetch all the records, and here you can see I'm going to fetch all the record, and the fourth record also that we just simply added Robert. So using this postman, we are able to use the same function that we used in the Swagger, and we have also completed the entire functionality of API. So we have one last functionality that you can use it called the loggers. Let us see how do you add logging in your API so that you can track what is happening, which method failed, and what parameters are passed. So I'll just add one logger method over here in one of the methods and show you how to implement logger. If you go to the program files, here already we have the capabilities. So we go to the controller class over here, and then we initiate a variable called logger, private read only ilogger, and we pass in our class student controller, and this is a variable logger, and that initialize over here. So we do the same over here, and we initialize this logger variable. So once we do that, you can go to the method where you want to enable logger and add that. So it has various methods. So here you have get student. So this is the get student method. Here we can add one logger like an information. So I say underscore logger dot log information and fetching all student details list. Similarly, if there is any issue and you want to highlight that into understand that, for example, bad request, you can say logger dot log error dot error. So this log error. So you can say ID student ID was not passed. Something that you can always use it for your troubleshooting purpose. Very simple, provided by .NET, so you can just simply use it instead of using any third-party component. So if you just run this project now, I should be able to see this information in my command prompt. So we click on get all student, and I see tryout execute. You see the information fetched, but if I go to my console, I should be able to see this is over here. You can see here, you can see fetching all customer list. So this is used for your tracking, where you can easily track what's going on. And it's a simple method that I thought it will be useful for my students to know that you can use this capability simply provided by .NET to log your information or log your errors to troubleshoot any request and response. So guys, with this I complete the entire tutorial on creating a web API, a full-fledged web API that performs a CRUD operation. And I've also covered certain important concept of an API. So I hope this tutorials was useful, and you will be able to create more advanced features and more API methods on requests and response using these tutorials. Thank you guys for watching this video, and thank you for your time. I request everybody to subscribe my channel and share my channel link with your friends, family and colleagues to help me to grow this channel and to reach out more developer community. So thank you very much. Please do like this video and comment. Thanks for your time.